Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm encouraging people to take their seats for the next panel. Hello. Well, while this group gets seated, I'm going to introduce myself quickly. My name is Elizabeth Wagley. I'm the CEO of Progressive Book Club. And in fact, we do exist, and we've been around since June. So we're very happy to be here. And I just wanted to tell you all a little bit about what we do. For 40 years, the conservatives have been active with the Conservative Book Club because they know that books matter. They know that they affect the way people think and act, that they credentialize and legitimize ideas like no other media. And so for 40 years, they have invested in books and their distribution, no matter how scurrilous or illegitimate anything within them. And we've repeatedly seen the fruits of their labors, from the bell curve to Unfit for Command to Jerome Corsi's Abomination. We founded Progressive Book Club to fight back, to gather our audience, to flex our power, and to deepen our understanding of our ideas and values. I hope you'll all join us. And just to address, for those of you who are listening to the last panel, the suit against Regnery and the Conservative Book Club have indeed engaged in practices that a lot of authors don't like and are suing them. And just so you know, that's because they have not been paid royalties and not because of the discounts that you can get at book clubs. So, in fact, if you join Progressive Book Club today, you can get the 3 books, 2 books by Barack Obama and his new book that's coming out in next month for $1. And so that's right now on the site. So we're very happy to be here and hope you'll all join us. And with that, I would like to turn this over to Anne Marie Slaughter, who's Dean of the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University.
Hi, everyone. I should actually introduce myself as Paul Krugman's boss, because he is at the Woodrow Wilson School, and to note that I am not the person that told him to dial it down after the 2004 election. Must have been his other boss, so I won't comment at the Times. So we need to begin, actually, with the recording of some intros and outros, if you'll just bear with me. No? Terrific. I was misled. So we don't need to begin with that. We can begin with the panel. But let me just say, before I introduce the panel, that there is going to be a cocktail party from 5 to 6 here at the Big Tent, and we hope all authors and audience will join if you want to continue these conversations. Our panel is The Next America, and we have a wonderful group of new authors whose books are either just out or just about to be out to talk about what the next America should be. Before I introduce them, though, I just want to set the stage. The next America. Let's talk about where we are right now. It's very easy. We're talking about the world, talking about the nation, but specifically the world. It's a mess. We've got all the old threats we've always faced, the threats of what in my business we call geopolitics. We have rising powers like China and India and Brazil and South Africa, lots of rising powers. We have powers like the United States that are feeling insecure. We have powers like Russia that are coming back and trying to prove themselves on the world stage using force. All of that creates the standard problems that geopolitics deals with. You know, how do you try to use diplomacy, sometimes even at least the threat of force, to try to keep the world a more stable environment. At the same time, we have all the new problems. We have climate change, we have energy security, we have global epidemics, we have terrorism and other kinds of transnational crime. So we have all these problems that arise not from states, but from non-state actors. And amid all that, the United States is weaker, and its moral standing in the world is at an all-time low. We are in a far weaker position to address any of these problems than we were in 2000. So that's the stage for the current America. Your panelists are going to tell you how to move from the current America to the next America. Let me start here on my immediate left. I think that's probably an accurate statement in this case. Markos Moulitsas, you all know him as the founder of the Daily Kaz, so you get to actually see him. I've been reading him for years, but I've never actually seen him there. He is the author of 2 books, and most recently, Taking on the System, Rules for Radical Change in a Digital Era, which is just out, yes? Just out. To his left is Jane Mayer, who is a staff writer for The New Yorker. She's also a best-selling author. She's published 2 books previously, and her new book, which is also just out, is The Dark Side, the inside story of how the war on terror became a war on American ideals. And her writing for The New Yorker on inside the events of the torture, the double talk of what has really been a betrayal of our best ideals is very powerful stuff. And to her left is Van Jones, who's the founder and the president of Green for All. He is, he deserves a hand. He has a forthcoming book. It's called The Green Collar Economy, How One Solution Can Fix Our 2 Biggest Problems. And it will be out in October, and we're going to be able to get a preview. So that is our panel. I would like to begin by telling all of them I'm going to take John Podesta's old job for this brief minute. He was chief of staff, of course, to Bill Clinton, and President Obama's been elected, and I'm chief of staff, and each of you has 5 to 7 minutes to explain to the president why your idea is going to help form the next America. Marcus. You can sit.
Okay, I'm gonna sit. I'm a blogger. I'm used to sitting. So I have, how many minutes? 3 to 4? 5 minutes to tell the president how my idea is. Here's what I'm about and what I've been working on. And this is what Taking on the System discusses. And it's the democratization of participation amongst people in those issues that they really, really care about. The book focuses heavily on politics because that's my world, but we're seeing this in music as record labels are suddenly bypassed by artists going directly to their fans. And we're seeing this in Hollywood as we have guerrilla filmmakers putting their stuff up on YouTube and other sites like it. We're seeing it in technology as the Microsoft dominance is chipped away by small software companies and Linux and open source. And so little by little what we have is technology has empowered people to go beyond simple observation and just being an audience member to a participatory model. People can engage in those things that they care about. How does this relate to the White House? I think we're seeing it. We're seeing it with the Obama campaign. Very recently, there was a big dust-up over the FISA bill, this intelligence bill, and a lot of progressives were vehemently opposed to this bill. And Obama had promised at one point to help filibuster this thing, but then I think they realized that, you know what, politically, it's just easier for us if we vote for this thing and have it go away, and we can focus on other things. So, in a sense, we were feeling a little bit betrayed, and there was a huge sort of outcry in the Netroots against Obama's position. But it went a step further. It didn't just happen in places like Daily Kos. We had people go on Barack Obama's own website, and he created a group that was opposing Obama on his FISA position, essentially using his tools to oppose his policy position. Now, in the past, that group may have been closed down. They may have been muzzled, right? They may have said, this isn't the place to disagree with Barack Obama. But I think they realize that we're stronger as a nation and as a movement and as a party when we can have an honest and open discussion about these issues. We can let each other know when we disagree. And there came a point where Obama had to come to his own website to tell his own supporters organizing against him on myBarackObama.com and say, look, I hear you guys. I get it. I get your position. Here's where I stand on it. And when I'm president, I'm going to try to address a lot of these concerns. So this was a watershed moment. I mean, you know, the rabble had, this wasn't David Broder, you know, having a problem with it. This wasn't Chris Matthews or the traditional elite. This was a bunch of rank and file supporters that had it, wanted to say, and Obama addressed them and acknowledged them and said, we're going to have this discussion. So as we move to the future, I would hope that right now we're having this discussion within the party. But when he's president, I hope that he opens it up and he has this discussion with the American people and is open and transparent and explains himself and doesn't necessarily listen to what his advisors say or what the Beltway elite media tell him the heartland says. Because we know that the Beltway media in DC, they don't have a clue what the heartland thinks. They talk like they know what the heartland thinks. They make this stuff up and I don't know where they, you know where they pull it out of, right? Where the sun don't shine. And, well, the heartland, you know, this is what people in Kansas think, you know, and it's somebody in Park Avenue in New York City. So what we're seeing now is that technology allows people that really live in Kansas have a say. And as long as that's embraced, I think we're going to have a more democratized government and a government that's more truly responsive to the American people and not to a sort of gatekeeping elite.
Terrific, thank you. So it's not going to be politics as usual, campaign, listening, and then you get to the White House and you make policy top down. It's an ongoing, continuing movement that connects all of us. And a conversation, which is exactly the right place to move to Jane Mayer.
Does this work? Okay. Well, first I have to say thanks for coming and to let you know that basically I'm much more comfortable in the position of asking the questions than answering them. I'm not really a predictor of the future. I'm somebody who spends a lot of time trying to figure out what the truth is really underneath the surface in Washington. I have to say, Marcus, I'm part of the inside the Beltway media. But I looked at my job as trying to connect the dots between the policymakers in Washington and the repercussions around the world, because sometimes those dots are pretty obscured by the public relations business and just basically a lot of national security secrecy and all kinds of things that it's made it very hard to get to the bottom of the truth. The book that I've just written, The Dark Side, is an effort to write about exactly what it was that Vice President Cheney meant when he went on Beat the Press the first Sunday after 9/11 and said that to win the war on terror, we're going to have to work on the dark side. We're going to have to go kind of in the shadows, he said, and basically do anything at our means, that are at our disposal to win the war on terror. And what he meant has been very hard to find out, but I've spent a couple years writing about this, and the book tries to compile basically the story of how the war on terror became not just a battle for America's security, but a battle for America's soul. And I really do think that some of the questions facing us now have to do with how far we're willing to go in terms of imitating the enemy to try to so-called win the war on terror, whatever that actually means, and whether or not these policies have been smart. And I take a close look in the book at a number of things that have been tried by the Bush administration, and find that if you look carefully, you can see that much of the rhetoric has been untrue. The president has told us over and over again that these things have been necessary to make us safe. In fact, we've gotten a lot of bad information out of torturing people, or torturing, they'll say it's not torture, but yet another thing that's not exactly completely honest. And in fact, a lot of the information we've gotten has led us to terrible places, including helping stoke the war in Iraq. So anyway, I would rather be answering questions. I'm going to hand it back to you. But I think in terms of the future, there are a lot of questions about whether the country really wants to continue to go on in this direction. It's a hard thing for Obama to take on because the Democrats have felt that, I guess they've really felt that it's not a winning political issue yet. In Saddlebrook, whenever it was last weekend, Obama brought up on his own the need to not torture under any circumstances. And, you know, he's also stood up for habeas corpus rights and said that he will remedy that and make it no longer possible for a president to simply detain someone forever without any judicial process. So there are things that he said he wants to change, and McCain has been quite a bit more, he's been less bold as we've gotten closer and closer to the election.
Thanks. It's, you know, please. When you talk about America's soul, and we talk about the next America, it's really a question of national identity. It's really a question of whether being America, being American, means something different from being any other great, powerful country that has dominated the international order through history. And we have traditionally always answered that question, yes, it means something different because we have lines we will not cross. And that's the fight. And when you talk about America's soul. And I'll pass it back to you, and then I'm going to pass it to Van to listen to him.
Well, just one thing I want to say about that, which is that for people who are progressive, I think it's very important in looking at the torture issue to frame it as not just an issue about whether it's Democrats versus Republicans. It's really about American traditions and values. And some of the most outspoken people who have really stood up and taken this fight in a very difficult way are the military and the FBI, who have stood up for the rule of law in this country and for traditions that date back to George Washington of not being brutal and abusive as state policy. So I think that it's a winning issue, and I hope that people won't be too afraid to take it on.
Well, first of all, glad to be here, and I continue to be glad for the Alliance for Sustainable Colorado for having made this possible. And I think we should give them another round of applause for their generosity and commitment to this conversation ongoing throughout the convention. I don't have a lot of advice for the president. I think that the most precious thing in the country right now is not the Barack Obama candidacy. Barack Obama is a beautiful man, a beautiful candidate, he's a historic figure, but Barack Obama didn't create the grassroots movement. The grassroots movement created Barack Obama. We've got to keep that clear. It was the people in this room who, in the heartbreak of 9/11, who saw the pain of the country, pimped to justify unjust war, torture, the shredding of the Constitution, stood up when it was hard. I think we've almost forgotten our own history in this room. It was very difficult in those days to love this country and also love the ideals on which this country was founded. And we fought through. I remember those Thanksgiving dinners. It was hard. And we fought through, and we fought through, and we were able to bring the country back to its best self. And a brilliant leader named Barack Obama saw our beauty, saw our determination, saw our courage, and was willing to align himself with what we stand for. And so the most important thing that can happen, win or lose in November, is that we continue, that we carry on, that we carry forward. I think I share a lot in common with many of you in that we are now trying to move from opposition to proposition. We're trying to move from critique and protest and telling the country what's wrong to some kind of solution-oriented agenda. And for that, we need a new paradigm. For that, we need a new politics. For that, we need a coherent set of policies. And I do not expect that to come from a single candidate, whether they're running for dog catcher or president of the United States. That comes from movements. That comes from movements. And we're lucky because of the incredible achievement of the Netroots that we have a more dialogic and conversational movement in this country than we've had since the turn of the prior century. My book tries to propose a paradigm. The book is called The Green Collar Economy. We were going to call it the Green New Deal, but we thought that might date it too much, so we call it the Green Collar Economy. But fundamentally, what I'm suggesting out of the green wing of our grassroots movement is that we want a solution-oriented environmentalism now. We want a hopeful, social uplift environmentalism now. We want an environmentalism where the icons are good American folks getting up in the morning, putting on their work boots, putting on the tool belts, rolling up their sleeve, and environmentalism with the sleeves rolled up. dirt under the fingernails, fixing America, rebooting, repowering, refueling, rebuilding this country so that we can be a part of the great clean energy solution in the solar age, moving out of the last century's pollution-based economy into something new, and putting people to work. So this book is kind of a manifesto. It's a call for a social uplift environmentalism. It's an attempt to offer something to our movement, not so much to the president, there's a lot in there about policy, but to our movement. There's something now we can strive for. We put this country on our backs when people were willing to walk away from 200 years of movement in a democratic direction and beginning to move back in an authoritarian direction. And we brought the country, we rescued the country from its worst instincts. And I, for one, am not someone who romanticizes the 1990s or the 1980s. We've got to remember now that we had torture in this country before George Bush. There were members of the Black Panther Party who were tortured. There were allegations of torture in Chicago jails in the early 1990s, and the grand jury actually brought forward indictments. We have to remember in Abu Ghraib, the worst offenders over there, their jobs here were prison guards. A lot of what you saw in Abu Ghraib is happening in U.S. prisons. So I don't want to romanticize the 90s. But throughout the 90s, we had stubborn little movements that were growing. And some of that showed up as the Nader campaign, some of it showed up as the WTO protests, some of it showed up as Free Mumia. We were growing a grassroots pro-democracy movement. And we got hit in the head after 9/11, and we came back and we rescued the country. And my view is that it's this pro-democracy movement, not any one candidate, that when we look back in history, will have the lion's share of the credit for making America what it should be.
I guess Barack Obama's already chosen his vice president, and I'm a great fan of Joe Biden's, but you know, if he hadn't. So I am both a moderator today and a panelist. Mark asked me to talk just a little bit. I got my same 5 minutes. Any of you can pass me a note if I if I stray on foreign policy. I wrote a book a year ago called The Idea That Is America, Keeping Faith with Our Values in a Dangerous World, that was absolutely, essentially a plea to have a value-based foreign policy, but one that was consistent with our values, not a value-based foreign policy that I saw betraying our values. I'm just going to give you the 5 things that I think the next president should do within the first year of his foreign policy agenda. And the first 2 things are absolutely a page out of Jane Mayer's playbook, because the very first thing he should do is stand up and announce that he is closing Guantanamo. In my view, he should appoint a national commission, and it should be a bipartisan commission, and he should say, you know, within 2 months, I want a set of recommendations as to how we close Guantanamo and what we do going forward, and I want it in 2 months, and I'm going to act on it. A little political cover would be a good thing, but that should be the first thing, because that is a national stain. It works. We cannot stand in the world until we close Guantanamo. Second, we must announce that we adhere to the Geneva Conventions, all Americans in all interrogations. All we got to do is look to the military. They are leading the way on both these issues, and we should stand up and say that's who we're about. That's the first 2 things he should do. Third thing I think he should do is to stand and to say, you know, we got through the Cold War without the use of a nuclear weapon, but the world now is heading for a situation in which we're going to have 10, 20, 30 nuclear powers. That the risk sooner or later that a nuclear weapon will be used deliberately, accidentally, or given to a terrorist is absolutely unacceptable. We, the United States, with the former Soviet Union, have the largest nuclear arsenals. We must lead on this issue, and until we start demonstrating that we are looking for a nuclear-free world down the road, again, there's plenty of political cover. We've got Henry Kissinger and George Shultz on this wagon. Until we do that, we can't expect any progress on the issue. So that would be the third thing he's got to say. The fourth thing, coming back to Van Jones, it's got to be about climate change, energy security, and a new economy. I mean, the green collar economy is absolutely right, but it's not just right for the United States. It's right for the world. I've just spent 10 months in China, and when I got back, I spent a full week just breathing, just thinking, oh, I can't believe how blue the air is. And Princeton, New Jersey is great, but it's not exactly the most crystalline air in the world. After 10 months in Shanghai, you just couldn't believe how bad conditions are in China. So we need to lead a coalition of nations that says we have to tackle this, and we have to tackle this by creating alternatives. If we create alternatives, if we change the basis of our economy, everything gets better. We're no longer dependent on Middle Eastern oil. We're no longer competing with China and other rising powers for oil. We are no longer looking at all the security problems that climate change will bring to us. We're no longer looking at the tremendous development and poverty issues that are resulting from climate change already. So the fourth issue has to be climate change, but it's climate change, energy security, and Van put it perfectly, a new paradigm. A new paradigm we start at home and we work with other countries around the world. And the fifth issue, we are still the largest, most powerful nation in the world. We are at the center of a set of global institutions that were created in 1945 for the world of 1945. China, Russia, Soviet Union, Britain, France, the United States. Those are the members of the Security Council. If you are in any of the countries in the developing world, if you're in India or Indonesia or anywhere in Africa or anywhere in Latin America, you're thinking, who on earth are you to declare what's good for global peace and security? The United States, as a democratic nation, as the world's oldest democracy, as a nation that stands for democracy, we're not going to have a world government and one person, one vote. But what we can do is to say, we stand for sharing power at the tables of power. We should stand for opening up the circles of decision to the countries that represent the majority of the population of the world, but to those countries that have to be a part of global solutions. And those are African countries, Latin American countries, India, major powers around the world. We can't tell how that process is going to come out, but the United States has to stand up and say, as the reigning power, we recognize we must widen the councils of decision. So that's my 5 propositions. The first 2 would make it a more just world. Nuclear proliferation would make it, countering it, would make it a safer world. Climate change would make it a richer and cleaner world, and opening the councils of power would make it a fairer world. That's what the United States should stand for. Thanks. So now I'm putting my moderator hat back on. I'm listening to all 3 of you, and I'm becoming uncomfortably aware of my age. I'm the 80s, the 90s. I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm on the cusp. I'm closer in age to Obama, but probably closer in political formation to Hillary. I do have my 11-year-old son here, who's here for his first convention, so I'm here with the next generation. But what I want to ask all of you is, in this new paradigm, this incredibly wonderful, connected world, what do we say to the people who feel like they're being left behind? To my parents who, yeah, they can use email. They're feeling really good about using email. My mother can even go on a blog occasionally, but they're not completely, connected all the time. To the workers who say, I'm a little too old for this new paradigm. I mean, I sort of feel like somebody felt in East Germany after the wall came down, and unfortunately, I was just a little too old to take advantage of that whole new world. I think there are an awful lot of Americans who are very afraid of being left behind. And even if they see the promise of this world for their kids and their grandkids, they're not ready to kind of throw in the towel yet. So what do we say to those people?
One of the misconceptions about the Netroots is that it's a bunch of 20-somethings in their mother's basement, wearing pajamas, eating Cheetos. That's the Republican bloggers. In reality, Daily Kos, the average age of the median age of a Daily Kos reader is 45. I have more people over the age of 65 reading Daily Kos than I have under the age of 25. It's a much older audience. One of the things I talk about in taking on the system, and it doesn't answer the people who feel that they're left behind, but technology is not about blogging. It's not about, oh, can you use YouTube? Really, it's about using the tools that are emerging to do this sort of activism and engagement in the ways they feel comfortable. For example, we have a digital divide in a lot of the more disadvantaged communities in this country. But in the Latino community has the highest penetration of cell phone usage of any community in the United States. And that was well used during the immigration protests a couple of years ago. Ethnic media, which is one of the fastest growing media segments, basically internet and ethnic media are the only ones that are growing. Everybody else is sort of having trouble keeping their audience. Between the Spanish language radio and cell phones, they were able to plan these massive protests. It had nothing to do with blogging, it had nothing to do with the internet really. It was using the tools available, and the media landscape is changing in such ways, and it's fragmenting in such ways that people can find those areas that they're really interested in. So I hear, well, I don't know about a blog, and I say, who cares, right? Find what you're comfortable with and use that to take a part in your world around you.
I'm also told we now have 4 minutes, so I'm going to give Van 2 minutes on this question, and then I've got a last question, a 1-minute question for Jane.
Well, there were two parts of the question. One about people being left behind technologically, and the other about people being left behind economically. And I think I've spoken quite a bit from this stage about the urban problems. I also wanted to say something about the rural problem. We have coal miners in this country who are heroes. They've powered this country to this point. They sacrificed the health of their lungs. They're now being asked to blow up their own communities, blow up the mountains, and destroy the beauty of America to continue this thing moving forward. We need to retire them as heroes. Some of them are not going to want to go and become computer programmers or go work at Walmart. We should say to them, we're going to actually give you a hero's retirement. We're going to write you a check. We appreciate your contribution that much. Then we won't have to fight them. We'll spend more money fighting them in Congress than we would if we just wrote them a check and gave them the dignity that they deserve. I think that the opportunity that we have to make this a just transition, all of the workers in the extractive industries, whether it's oil or coal, need to be honored and respected, and we need to make sure that they're taken care of in the transition. There is a great deal of pain in rural America that's not being spoken about. We hear about the homicide crisis in urban America. There's a suicide crisis in rural America. There's a meth crisis among our young people there. We deserve to give the young ones a paycheck and a purpose in greening America, and we deserve to give our oldest citizens a decent retirement.
So, last question. Jane, as briefly as you can, tell us why America is stronger if we stand on our basic values rather than weaker.
Well, most of those policies have become so counterproductive in terms of torture. We've gotten bad information, as I say, that led us into wars, into the war in Iraq. It's lowered our standing around the world so that at the last poll I saw, it was only, I think, Russia and India were the only countries where public opinion supported our war on terror. Egypt has been citing us, Hosni Mubarak, as an example that shows that they are justified in brutalizing people. And the single greatest recruiting tool for jihad are pictures of Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo. If you want to win the war on terror, you're going to have to win the hearts and minds of the next generation of young Muslims around the world, and you really can't do that by torturing their relatives.
Thank you. I want you to thank our panel. I want to remind you that the books are Taking on the System from Marcos Melitsas, The Green Collar Economy from Van Jones coming out in October, and The Dark Side from Jane Mayer. Thanks.
To the audience who has stayed this long, the good news is the beer and the chips and the cheese are here. Please stay for a reception with authors and audience. To Alliance for a Sustainable Colorado and the Progressive Book Club, Air America is very grateful for your partnership in putting this on. And I want you to appreciate what this is. The biggest thing this week is the nomination of Barack Obama and Joe Biden to be the next president and vice president. A close second is who you heard today. Without laboring through every speaker, we just heard from Marcos, who is among the pioneers of an entirely new medium in America. We heard from Jane Mayer, whose magazine articles and book have turned over the rock showing the dark side of this government, which won't be continued. Van Jones is about the leading intellectual laying out a green-collar economy. Anne-Marie Slaughter at the Wilson School, and in her book, The Idea of America, and in the article in the American Prospect that she just referred back to with her 5 points, has laid out a new foreign policy as well as anybody. Ted Sorensen was the first person, I think, who credibly linked John Kennedy and Barack Obama, who young men who represented people who grew up from the other side of the tracks, religiously and racially, and how they could govern America. So Air Americans, appreciate, we are the mainstream, they are the extreme, and we're together changing America. Thank you all very much, and thank our panel.